Okay, we're going to show you how to effect repair on the horizontal climate control in a 1983 Mercedes 300D diesel. The procedure that we're going to show you is similar for most climate control devices. In this case, this is the horizontal one, and I'm just going to show you how to remove it. Later on we'll have a segment on how to repair it, and then we'll show you how to put it back in again. The first thing you're going to need is a little penknife or a little teeny screwdriver, a flat screwdriver, and then a Phillips screwdriver. And all you'll do is there's a wooden panel here that just pops off. There's 4 little pins to push in. You want to be careful not to chip it. So if it's not coming out easily, then you'll need to not bend it. The lacquer on here, the urethane lacquer, will crack very easily, so you want to be careful on that. Once that panel's removed, you want to set that aside, and it exposed the inside unit. We won't need the knife anymore. You'll need now the Phillips, and we're going to remove these 2 screws right here. So remove the top left screw and the top right screw. And then what you'll do is you kind of rock this forward a little bit. I will need the little screwdriver again. You want to rock this forward a little bit, and as it comes forward, you'll notice that cut. Alright, once you've removed the right screw, what happens is there's 2 little tangs down here that tie into the bottom console, so you have to kind of pry the front off first and then lift it up, and then it'll clear. As you can see, there's 2 little tangs right here that mate to the console here, and so it won't just slide out. You have to rock it a little bit forward. The first thing that you need to do is you need to pull off on the side. There's a little connector here on either side that are just on there, pushed on. Just rock it off, rock it back and forth. The other side, you rock back and forth also. Takes a little patience. All right. Now, right up front, there's 4 lights, and the lights light different portions of the control unit, and these lights burn out quite often. This light here lights up the temperature control. The center light, the center 2 lights light up the panel lights here, and then the light over here lights up the fan switch. And these just pop out, so you just pull these back and they'll just pop right out. Once you've pulled those off, the unit is free, and you can take it in and follow the procedure we're about ready to show you on how to repair it. Okay, we showed you how to remove the climate control unit from the car. Now I'm going to show you how to repair it. For this segment, what you'll need is a small penknife. In this case, it's a Swiss Army knife with the flat blade on the end. And you'll need a nice electronic soldering iron. In this case, I have one. It's a Solomon. It has a temperature that goes up to around 400 degrees C. This is nice because it affects a quick solder, and that's what we want in this case. I usually crank it up a little over 400 degrees C in order to get the quick effect that I need. So, and then you're going to need some really fine solder in order to proceed. If you don't have that, you might make sure that you have that. I wouldn't go with a wider solder. The tip on the soldering iron is critical. It needs to be a fine point tip, and also the solder needs to be very, very thin. If you try to use thicker solder, it'll probably get in the way, so I would recommend the smaller electronic solder. First thing that we want to do is we're not going to disassemble this any further than we already have. Typically what happens is over the period of time that this is in the automobile, you get vibration, and over time you develop what's called a cold solder joint. There's a couple things that occur. A solder a solder joint is simply, there's a hole in the circuit board and a component lead comes up through the hole. And then as you solder, when you apply solder on a smaller level than this, it creates kind of a volcano shape, a cone shape around the hole that the component lead has gone through and the component lead itself. Once it's been soldered, then they cut the end off of it, and it gives you not only electronic but a mechanical connection. Over time, as that vibrates, the inside of that vibrates, and it'll eventually work its way to where it's no longer electronically connected nor mechanically connected. What that gives you is an intermittency. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It's never reliable. Whenever that symptom occurs, you can pretty much bet it's going to be a cold solder joint. And in the Mercedes 300Ds, because of the diesel engine, that's typically the case. So what we want to do is we want to look at the electronics circuit board here on the side where we have the temperature rheostat, and you want to make sure that these 3 solder joints here and these 7 down here are okay. Now what I do just to be safe is I will typically take my soldering iron and just apply heat to it and let it reflow, and then remove the heat, and then let it reflow again and remove the heat, and I do that on all 3 of these on the side, and then I'm sure that they're no longer that they're not a cold solder joint. Just by reflowing the solder, it repairs it. These are a little larger, and when they're plugged in like this, they tend to sink or pull the heat away from the source, and so you don't want to. You probably don't want to solder these at this time. Just examine them and make sure that they're okay. What you want to look for is a little ring or a crack in the solder that would be actually quite obvious. In this case, these are okay, and typically they don't fail. These don't fail. It's the smaller ones that fail. The first thing we want to do is we want to flip this over, and you'll notice right under here is a little plastic plate. This plastic plate just comes off by loosening these little hooks right here. There's one there, there's one here, and there's one in the very center. And once you get those removed, that plate will just pop off, exposing the inside circuit board. Now you can see that there's probably 100 solder joints here, and I can tell by looking just at this circuit board right here that there's a cold solder joint right here, and there's a cold solder joint right there. I'm going to kind of zoom in here and to let you see a little closer. And what a cold solder joint looks like is, again, as the vibration occurs, it will develop. There'll be a little fine ring around about in the middle of the solder joint, and you can see that there's one right there, and there's one right here, and there's one developing there. Just to be safe, what I want to do is I'm going to sweep across this entire board, and I'm going to solder every single solder joint that I see. Now there's 2 things that you need to be careful of. The first one is, as you apply heat to these joints, the semiconductor, the component on the opposite side, is sensitive to heat. So you don't want to apply heat for an extended period of time. You want to get in and get out. So I'll show you here. So we apply solder opposite of where the heat source is, and it will flow to the heat source. And then you want to move away. The second thing you want to avoid is what's called a solder bridge. You can see right here that these two joints right there are very, very close right here. And it's possible that I could apply so much solder that the solder bridges across there and creates a short. You don't want to do that. So you want to be careful not to create a solder bridge, and also not to create a solder bridge, and not to apply too much heat to it. The other thing you want to be sensitive of is you want to do this in an area where there's no static electricity. A lot of times if you shock one of these circuit boards, the components will go bad. So avoid static electricity, and avoid prolonged heat, and avoid a cold solder joint. I'm going to go ahead and now work my way across here soldering these, and then I will pause the video and we'll return after we've completed the solder. Okay, I'm just about finished here. Now, right along in here is where it's most susceptible to having a cold solder bridge. Right in here, these leads are so close together, and there's so much solder on them that it's real easy to get these bridged. Okay, now the last thing you'll want to do is just do a visual inspection when the board is finished. You want to go back over and just visually inspect and make sure there's no solder between these joints right in here. It's a good idea to take a paper clip or something and just run between the leads that they're very close together, and make sure that they're clear. Okay. Now I might add that if you've never soldered before, you may want to experiment on an old board, one that doesn't matter. You can go down to your Goodwill or to your local second-hand store, and there's a lot of computer circuit boards down there that you could buy and bring home and experiment on that are $1 or $2, and that wouldn't hurt if you ruined those. So I would experiment on something like that before attempting to solder a more expensive and highly useful module such as this. But now that it's finished, I'm going to put the cover back on, and then we'll place it back in the car, and we'll test it out. One other thing that I might mention is you'll notice that there's a hole in the circuit board right here. That corresponds to this little nub in the lid. And so you want to make sure that it goes in this direction, and that way this little nub fits in this hole. If you get it reversed, it won't go in properly, and it'll just snap back in once you get it in the proper location. And now I can insert this back into the car, and as I mentioned earlier, we'll put it back in and give it a test. Alright, to put it back in, you just reverse the procedure that we showed you earlier. Replace the lights, and they just pop in. One thing you might want to do before you do that is check to make sure that the lights light up. So I'm going to go ahead and put the key in here, turn it over to where the light is on, and then I'll turn the lights on, and you can actually see that I have a burned out light on the right side, the very end one. So my fan lights will not come on. Okay. So we'll just pop those back in real quick. I have some lights, but I'll save that for another procedure. We'll pop that in. Just reverse by putting the connector on the side. It kind of goes on there pretty straightforward. Then the left side. And once you get them on, as you slide this in, put the bottom in first. It'll pop in first. Then once the bottom in, the top will slide in, and you simply replace the screws, the top right screw, the top left screw, and then just put the panel back on. Again, here's the four little standoffs, and they mate with these holes here. They just will pop right in. So you get it back on and push it on. And now you can you'll test it in the normal manner. Test the fans and the climate control, and then adjust this to see if it adjusts the dampers. And we're done.